Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. My name is Zamyla Chan. I'm really excited to be moderating the Acceleration Consortium's first ever panel, Break the Bias, Women Accelerating Science. And just before we begin this event, I do wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto, the host of the Acceleration Consortium, operates. It is the unceded and unsurrendered traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place virtually is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live on this land. I will say that this acknowledgement should not be conflated with action, but rather a statement of where we are and how far we have to go. For today's event, hosted by the Acceleration Consortium, I'd just like to tell you a little bit of our organization and what we do. We'll meet the wonderful panelists joining us today and proceed into a discussion with a Q&A opportunity for all participants at the end. During then, you're welcome to enter any discussion and questions in the chat on text. We do ask that you stay muted until the end, when we would gladly love you to unmute, go on video if you'd like, and chat with all of the panelists and yourself. The Acceleration Consortium is a new initiative out of the University of Toronto, but it is indeed global. The goal of the Acceleration Consortium is to accelerate the discovery of materials and molecules that we need for a sustainable future. And we do this by a multidisciplinary technique of self-driving labs or materials acceleration platforms. So we combine material science with artificial intelligence and robotics to close the loop of discovery, to speed up the rate of discovery of such needed materials. As I said, it is, although based at the University of Toronto, a global consortium of academics, many of whom are in the panel today, industry in the panel as well, and government from around the world, in order to expedite this. Now, beyond this, we do have goals to really transform the paradigm of the scientific innovation, but also to train and set up an environment for the next generation of talent in this area. And such talent is represented in the panel today. Each panelist that you'll meet today is an excellent leader in their field, and we're looking forward to hearing more from them. And so with that, I'd actually like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves briefly with your name, your pronouns, and about 1 to 2 minutes about your educational and professional journey, if you will. Let's go down the list, which I realize puts me first, and then we'll continue down the list. So I'll go first. My name is Zamyla Chan. I am the Associate Director of Platforms and Training at the Acceleration Consortium. My pronouns are she, her. And before joining the Acceleration Consortium, I did my postdoc at the Vector Institute, building a self-driving lab for electrochemical deposition. And prior to that, I did my PhD in chemistry with Dan and Sarah at Harvard, studying thin films for water splitting catalysts. I am extremely passionate about teaching as well, and have spent a lot of my time thinking about how to make computer science education in particular more accessible and multidisciplinary. And so a large passion of mine, for about 9 years, I was the walkthrough lead for CS50, an introductory and intensive computer science course. And that was a really amazing experience to travel the world and also to reach computer science students or people just interested in getting more access that otherwise wouldn't through a free, open, and awesome course. And with that, I'll turn it over to Preeti.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Preeti Kamakoti, and I am a chemical engineer by training. I got my PhD at Carnegie Mellon, and I have been at ExxonMobil my entire career. So I spent the first several years of my career in the basic research organization, focusing a lot on materials discovery for separations and catalysis. And I then moved over to the process technology organization, where I focused a lot on taking early stage ideas and then really translating them towards commercialization through scale up and development. And 5 years ago, I built from the grounds up an initiative called Data-Driven Design, which combines R&D digitalization with data sciences and model-guided methodologies to really shift the paradigm on how we do materials R&D. So this is something that I really created on my own, and I have a lot of passion for. Something that I really enjoy doing in outside of work is tutoring. I wanted to be a teacher when I was young, and it's just something I really enjoy, teaching and tutoring, and it's something that I'm pretty actively involved in as a volunteer.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Lilo Pozzo. My pronouns are she, her also. I am from Argentina. I grew up in Puerto Rico and actually went to the University of Puerto Rico. But before that, I actually lived in Toronto also for a couple of years. So I do feel actually still somewhat tied to Canada and Toronto. Since then, I actually I did my bachelor's in chemical engineering and then also a PhD in chemical engineering, where I actually met Preeti. So we overlapped for a little bit in CMU. After that, I joined the NIST Center for Neutron Research for a postdoc, and eventually took on an academic position at the University of Washington in the Department of Chemical Engineering, where my research has really focused on soft materials, particularly colloids, polymers, and self-assembling systems. And for the longest time, I've been interrogating these materials, or my team has been interrogating these materials with neutron and X-ray scattering. And since the last 3 or 4 years, we've actually acquired a significant interest in using automation in the laboratory and data sciences to accelerate the research. So now my team is actually heavily focused on developing materials acceleration platforms, particularly for soft matter systems. So we've been working on electrolytes for redox flow batteries. We have other projects where we use AI-driven agents to design nanoparticle structures and many others. And outside of this, I am really interested in really reducing the barriers for researchers like me to enter into this field. So I'm really interested in figuring out how can we really scale this up so that accelerated science, material science is taking place in every laboratory in the world. And this actually is I think a pretty significant problem moving forward. And I think that advances in open hardware, open software, and just really open science are critical to making this a reality. And I look forward to more discussions. Thank you.
Great. Hi there, I'm Pantea. I'm head of design at Automata. We are a London, UK-based biotech company. We provide robotic automation solutions to folks in the life science industry. Though I live in Europe, I'm proud to say I'm a Toronto native, where I studied at OCAD University and started my professional journey working on the Toronto homegrown brain-computer interface meditation device called the Muse, which some might be familiar with. You might notice that unlike most of the esteemed women on this call, I don't have a science background. I am a strategic designer by trade. What that means is I spend a great deal of my time speaking to individuals and users of products and systems within the world to understand what's working well for them, what their needs are, and what we can do to make better experiences for more engaging interactions. And I've spent the last 15 or so years working alongside scientists, performing that, helping to build open source, accessible lab automation robotics to make life science platforms more accessible and user-friendly. Beyond that, I am a prolific startup enthusiast. I really thrive in ambiguity. And so I'm really thrilled to be here. And outside of this type of work, I just like to help designers rather make bridges into this world and work more closely with scientists, because there's such great opportunities for us to collaborate together. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shijing Sun. I'm a research scientist. at Toyota Research Institute in California. I work in the Energy and Materials Division. The research I do focus on autonomous materials discovery and design towards carbon neutral mobility. So I work on batteries, fuel cells, and I develop AI frameworks to accelerate the development of next generation batteries and other materials in electric vehicles. So my background is in materials chemistry. I did my bachelor and PhD in University of Cambridge in England. After that, I did my postdoc in MIT in mechanical engineering, where I was working on setting up high throughput thin film deposition platforms for solar cells. I was then a research scientist also at MIT, where I started to lead a small team on accelerated materials to really combine the machine learning, the automation, as well as the domain expertise to accelerate the idea of getting new energy materials faster. Throughout my career so far, I've been in science, engineering, and now in tech. So it's amazing to see we have a number of women leaders, and I was fortunate to have women mentors as well along the way. Outside work, I'm also interested in education. In particular, I'm interested in how do we teach machine learning to material scientists and engineers. I'm very excited to be here today and join the panel and join all of you for International Women's Day. Thank you.
Hi, all. My name is Helen Tran. I am an assistant professor at the University of Toronto in the Department of Chemistry and class-appointed in chemical engineering. I just started a year ago, but my group is generally interested in thinking about how to build electronics in the body. So we're thinking about self-assembly to put things together, thinking about ways how they can be compatible chemically and mechanically, and how to take them apart as well. This interest probably started way back when I was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. I was actually in the chemistry department, but my first research experience was in electrical engineering. I was Professor Sujay King Liu in electrical engineering. Then I realized I wanted to know a little bit more about chemistry, so I did PhD in chemistry with Luis Campos at Columbia University. And then I wanted to bring those things together. So I did a postdoc with Jianan Bao at Stanford University, who's working on stretchable electronics. I am generally interested in art. I really thought I was going to be an artist when I was younger. So throughout my life, I like to see if there's any projection art I can see, but also incorporate art whenever possible in my own work.
Wonderful. Thank you again to all our panelists for joining us. I'm really excited about the discussion that we have today. Let me just, for some reason, I'm not able to unshare my screen. There. Okay, there we go. Okay, so with that, let's get into the discussion section of the panel today. So the goal for this is that, recognizing that group support and discussion and application of common experiences can really bring to light practical solutions, broader perspectives. And so rather than a traditional panel, I'd love to have a more informal conversation today, as if it were the first meeting of, say, a professional problem-solving group where high-achieving, esteemed individuals can find practical, emotional support from one another. This is inspired by the book Every Other Tuesday, which was certainly critical to my own experience in grad school, and was narrated how successful women scientists formed these kinds of groups together. And so this was where we would meet and not just talk about personal, but also sometimes talk about science, right? A mix of everything in between. And so in the topics that we have for discussion today, the sky's the limit. We're not limited to identity. I think that there's a lot of interest in education and teaching amongst the group, as well as barriers in this new field, right, of accelerated discovery that we're all part of. And then also just before we continue to the audience, I do want to say that though this event is based on women and gathering women together, it is also necessary to recognize that within the panel, within the audience, within the community at large, there are both visible and invisible intersections of identity. We have race, gender, sexuality, culture, disability, and more. And so any kind of discussion should take that kind of intersectional lens with all that we're talking about today. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to the panel. I'd love to take this time to talk about some of the challenges that you might have identified either personally or that you notice from your peers. And again, this could be based on your own identity or talking about like your role in the field. Rather than going down the line for each panelist, I invite a brave soul to speak first, and we'll go off from there.
I can start. Yeah. So some of the challenges that I have faced in this field, but just really generally within my career, are there were certain perceptions about what it meant to be a leader, what it meant to have a voice, and there were very specific norms in the organizational culture that I came into. So it took a lot of work to really break through those barriers. And some of the perceptions that I dealt with was I was told I was too nice, I wasn't assertive and aggressive enough, I was too collaborative. And so again, you know, a lot of this has been really a journey, and, you know, with the support of mentors and peers, and really being able to find a voice and having the courage that I do bring something unique to the table, and that the work I do can make a difference, and really almost providing a different perspective to others who are also in the same situation as I am. So I will say there've been challenges, but I've also really tried to view them as opportunities to not only reimagine how I work, but also be an inspiring role model to others who are also in the same situation. Because I know there's others just like me that have their own unique challenges and struggles.
Absolutely. I think that speaks a lot to what we are like, you know, what we are told scientists might act like, look like, right? I've also been told that I'm not aggressive enough, or I don't have a killer instinct. And in reality, that's not something I would agree with, but I think that it's a matter of what that looks like when I present it as opposed to someone else.
I can chime in. I think a big challenge that is not exclusive to this field is it's essentially like when you come in with a new idea, right? Like you're such as this field, which is relatively new or growing very, very rapidly in the last few years. You're sometimes it's a little bit of a struggle, right? As essentially women to really make a dent and really have these ideas float up. And to enter into this field, there needs to be a significant, usually a significant investment in infrastructure. And when you're trying to push for this, right? And I've been doing this for the past, 4 or 5 years. It's really, really hard unless you have the, like an activation energy of like a significant group that is also kind of like pulling into this. So I think that there is always this fight about like skepticism about whether this is going to chime in. And when you are coming in right with an identity that maybe is outside of the norm of what is usually expected in terms of like driving, pushing these ideas can be a real struggle. So I definitely face that. I think it to a degree, it was part of the a motivation to jump into leadership roles in the last year or so, because I knew that I was going to be able to break some ground for others to follow, to actually have their ideas really become a reality. And it's been definitely a struggle in terms of like, okay, how can I balance, right, my new roles and responsibilities with essentially advancing the field right at the same time. But I did think that it was an essential step in order to break ground here at the University of Washington. And I do think that we are making some great strides, and I look forward to the future and continued growth. But I do have to say that it took a while until these ideas that I was presenting about whether we should purchase instrumentation that is compatible with automation and so on could really float. So that was a personal struggle, I think.
And I'll just sort of add on about the idea of breaking the ground, because people like Lilo are sort of breaking the ground for younger people like me. I'll say, like, when I was an undergraduate in this electrical engineering lab, I was the only woman identifying undergraduate working in the clean room. So like every day I was like, okay, I definitely stand out. And actually a sort of unusual but very inspiring aspect of being an undergraduate was my PI was a woman. And so for me, it really changed my perspective. I was like, the boss looks like me, right? And so that really encouraged me and made me feel comfortable to be in the research area. So as we're starting to launch this new area of research, having different types of people as in the leadership role does inspire younger generations to join in rather than feeling excluded immediately, right? I think that's really key, and I hope to contribute that as well. And I definitely acknowledge that there are a lot of people already breaking the ground for me.
Maybe I can add a little bit of perspective. So, I come more from an industry background rather than academia. And one of the biggest challenges I've had as environments and cultures of organizations change, and I find myself coming up against a wall, is essentially being able to hone my ability to assess whether an environment is one where I need to continue investing myself to prove myself out versus recognizing that, hey, maybe this environment is simply just not set up to help me succeed, and gaining the confidence to know when to make a change. I think it's really important to as a muscle to kind of like understand when is it the right time to move on and to not be afraid to make a change. And really like I find having a clear idea of the path that I want to go on, right, and the impact that I want to have, and then being able to really have a direct conversation with my manager to see if they're also willing to be as accountable to my success as I am to my team's success. I think oftentimes that can kind of, I can kind of forget about that, and you end up sort of participating in an environment longer than is necessary. Whereas you could potentially just go to another place and really quickly understand the value that you have. It can be celebrated much more quickly.
I think that really resonated with me. That's such a good point. And I think that those kinds of conversations and kind of being able to make that call is nerve-wracking. So I'm just curious what you found helpful in making those kinds of calls.
I mean, I'll be very honest. There was a scenario where I didn't make the call, right, and I stuck around too long, and I suffered for it. But I managed to, essentially quickly move on to the next place. And the more quickly you move on to the next place, the more quickly you're able to validate some of the feelings and observations that you had, right? And I think that the quicker we're able to make these changes, right, essentially having that courage to trust yourself, it makes it a lot, I won't say easier, but potentially more efficient or effective to recognize the next time if you're in a supportive or unsupportive environment.
I can also add a few experience from myself. I feel one of the struggles, especially for junior researchers, face is sometimes like we face like a bias. They may be not like very obvious, but a number of small events like may actually change our career path as a result. For example, I've seen like female undergraduates come to me saying, I noticed this graduate group does not have a women member. Shall I join the group or not? I've also like met with friends who came to me saying like, when I came to ask my parents for what should I do, like they point me more towards the careers that traditionally seem to be like to have more female members. And even myself, like I had experience once senior researcher was giving me career advice, and he saw me in lab like until late. He mentioned that maybe I may consider to do computational science. So in the future, when I have family, when like I'm doing my computational coding, you know, I can also take care of kids instead of being in the lab. I did end up doing more computational work, but not for this reason. So I think sometimes like throughout our life, we may hear like comments, feedback, suggestions, which like we feel, oh, that feels maybe that's coming from like biased views. So being able to identify them and not let these views to affect your own path, your own passion towards what you want to do, I feel is a challenge. And I also work on it myself to break through these biases.
Absolutely. I'm curious also, you know, some of the biases that present themselves like because of gender, right? There's when I think of bias, I also think of sometimes, you know, all of us interacting in this multidisciplinary field and newer approaches to things. Sometimes there's also a bias against that kind of approach. I'm curious to see whether any of you see a relation between the two. Is, you know, operating in this newer field easier or harder as compared to like say let's say like a traditional like just chemistry, just physics, that kind of thing?
So I can share some of my own experience. So I can't necessarily say if it's harder or easier, because I do think there's barriers and challenges that we face as being maybe not fitting into the kind of like the norms. But I think with this new area, and I'll talk about data-driven design, which is the initiative that I built. Yeah, sure. So at the time I started this initiative, a lot of our R&D work was really driven a lot by experience. We had a lot of domain experts that had deep expertise over decades, and it worked very well, for a while. So of course there was a lot of resistance initially around, like we don't need this, right? And essentially people had very preconceived notions about what some of these new capabilities could do. They also felt threatened that somehow, these new methodologies or computers would come like take away, what they were doing. So there were a lot of fears associated with that. And then also, I think just as a woman, and particularly, how do you get a seat at the table? How do you speak up? And so all those things have been challenging because I think cultural change is really, really hard. The way I have navigated that is really, it's about relationships. It's really about aligning with people that are curious, that are open and receptive and want to work with you. And you really start there. And then you almost build a journey and get more people on board over time. So you're not going to get everybody on board, right from day one. And it is going to be hard. But I've always found people, very supportive mentors or peers, or even senior leaders that have been open and receptive and really encouraged me to go out and start doing the work. Because I do believe that the world's not going to change all of a sudden. So I really believe in being the change that I want to see, and then really partnering up with others that want to really collaborate and then help do this work.
I think that brings up the question of, sometimes I think that like many might identify with not being in, to quote Hamilton, like the room where it happens, right? Not being, say, at the after hours pub crawl, right, where people meet and drink beers and make decisions about grants and projects and things like that. So there's either pushing in to try and find your way into that space, or like you mentioned, creating your own room and creating your own group that of like-minded or like individuals that you can work with. I think that's something that I think about a lot, right? I think that it's ultimately a balance of those two things. I'm curious to see what you all think of that.
I agree. I think that was exactly my experience entering this field. I actually started with an open source robotic tool to play with, and just out of pure interest. And I was only able to do that because it was actually open and affordable.
Mm-hmm.
So that was critical to actually creating my own room, right? Like starting enough, having enough space and enough freedom to actually play. And it really took essentially that, right, to essentially just kind of start the ball rolling and then grow. But if this pathway doesn't exist, right, for established researchers, it can be really, really difficult to create your own room in this field. And that's why I think it's really important that we create pathways. They could be either by, right, like figuring out affordable ways to enter and play, or providing core education opportunities for students, right, to enter this field, or perhaps shared resources, right, like that don't essentially require huge amounts of investment. But what you described was exactly my experience. Is it actually took creating my own room to create effectively enough interest from students, from other faculty members, to kind of like start catalyzing something that was bigger. Without this, I think that it would have been really, really challenging, and I was encountering a lot of brick walls. Whereas if you try to approach it and say, okay, we need something really big to actually get started, there is a lot of skepticism, and if you're not part of those, right, like after hours discussions, or you're not high up in leadership where money is being managed and decisions are being made, then it is practically impossible to do this. So that's why I feel so passionate about creating these on-ramps and figuring out, okay, I was able to do this and squeeze through, right? But how are others in other fields that perhaps, have different research interests, how are they going to enter these, like what are the on-ramps for them to come in and play and create their own rooms, and for these rooms to grow?
I think that's a great point. That's a great point. And your mention of on-ramps reminded me, Helen, of like we haven't had a chance to speak with it more in depth, but I know there was talk about like bridge programs and things like that. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to bridge programs and how that applies, what that would look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think how do we create more ramps, different types of ramps to accommodate different people and different stages, right? And one thing that Zamyla and I and a lot of people at the Acceleration Consortium is really interested in doing is creating a sort of a different type of pipeline where there are students, actually maybe someone like me coming out of a bachelor's in electrical engineering and chemistry, and trying to figure out, okay, I'm very interested in applying this knowledge to into robotics and automation, but I'm not sure where to start. How do we create a space for those students? There's a lot of students who have the skills to enter this field, but maybe they don't have the right connection, or they didn't pick the right major 4 years ago. So how do we create a space for these students and actually not just give them an empty room, but actually provide them a fully furnished room, right? With all the tools they need to succeed. And I think that's something that Zamyla and us are really interested in doing, hopefully in a year or two, I would say. So I'd love to hear if other people had comments on that. If there are programs in Exxon or Toyota Institute or Automata or UW, please let us know, because we're starting to build this together, right? And we want to build it for everyone. And I'll just add a comment at the end that it's interesting to think about building these separate ramps, but just keep in mind that anyone can use the ramp, right? It's not just like one person or one, it's not designed for a single type of person to enter on the ramp. The idea is we build more ramps, we get an influx of different types of people who can bring their knowledge, their different lived experiences, and help us solve these really complicated problems.
Thank you, Helen. I can add on a bit like about our ramping. So here at Toyota Research Institute, like we host internship programs like every year in summer, and we're just had a recent discussion about like how like internship programs can be avenue for us to educate or help the students particularly interested in our field to gain more skills, to collaborate with us, and to share what we learned with the community. So like one feature of our new field, I feel it is very interdisciplinary. As like many of you have mentioned, like we want to have mechanical engineers like who can help with the automation. We would love to have chemists, physicists, and material scientists to work on the important scientific challenges. Like our consortium can work together, and we also need like software engineers, maybe like machine learning scientists to really put the algorithms together. And I think a key word here maybe collaboration, or like so you know, we actually feel like in this field the collaboration if not more important, but very like significant in really putting the different pieces together in this interdisciplinary field. So in this sense, like I feel like the idea of being too collaborative may not like be like something we hope we don't have to worry too much, and we actually want to work together to bring in students, researchers, and also leaders from different fields to work together to advance in this new field.
Like that, and I think one of the goals of the Acceleration Consortium with our members is that we're hopefully able to like make those kinds of connections where there's at least like an underlying ethos of what of the kind of work that we're trying to do, that of course is quite expansive in application area and approaches. So I think that was wonderful. I'd like to maybe in the second half of this event today, maybe talk a little bit about looking forward, like looking ahead into the future. We've been doing already, but I suppose like going from the challenges that we've talked about, what you know, we started talking about on-ramps, but then what other types of things, you know, either policies or plans of action, like other types of events, how can we address some of these biases? Just like I think a lot about you know, the like sort of addressing the fact that whenever, you know, grants come into play, there is the EDI section that is required of grants. How and I think that sometimes that section can often easily become quite performative, and then sometimes I think, you know, like some good thinking can get done there, but that doesn't necessarily match up to things. I'm rambling a little bit here, but another thing that I wanted to mention with those is also what I wanted to ask is the issue of sometimes like the quotas, right? So where it's like, oh, we need to have a woman on the board, or we need to have a woman like in this list. where obviously inclusion is a goal, but inclusivity is the ultimate goal, right? Making it a welcoming atmosphere. If it isn't welcoming, then really there's no benefit in just having someone like having a woman for name's sake. So I think, yeah, so my general question is what kind of policies, what kind of other changes would you like to see in order to have a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive working environment?
One thing that I see as a potential challenge moving forward, and I don't think that this is exclusive only to this field, but perhaps also other newer and rapidly evolving fields, is the problem of gatekeepers. Like essentially where you have like, I don't know, like an evolution of like people, perhaps leaders in the field, right? That may or may not include a diverse set of researchers, kind of identifying what is the work or the scholarship that actually should be recognized and floated, like who. So we talked about on-ramps, right? But I think another thing that needs to be discussed is if there are gatekeepers, right? And how can we make sure that there are no gates, right? That everybody feels included, and that there is a pathway for growth and for adoption that does not essentially exclude people, but actually becomes very, very inclusive. So I think that this is really important to consider when really thinking at the core of how can we get beyond just, like you mentioned, performative EDI, right? Like, which is great, right? It's necessary to actually definitely attract more women, minorities, and other researchers into the field. But it's also really important that we tackle more of the concrete challenges that these people might face when they're playing in this field that might actually result in them eventually leaving. So it's not enough to just attract them into the field, but actually to encourage them and foster them to grow and to be leaders in this field. And I think that the challenge here might be gatekeepers, because of the fact that there is novelty, there's rapid growth. And I think that this could become a challenge for this field because of accelerated pace it's actually growing.
I've actually experienced that directly, where HR will make, within an organization, will make such an effort to really, bring up DEI, also train the hiring team, but at the end of the day, the team needs to go so quickly that when it comes to actually making sure that we're hiring for inclusivity, it gets lost, and it takes time investment. It really does. I also think that it also really requires, like, it necessitates someone at, within the company at an executive level being held accountable to pushing that forward. Because at the end of the day, within industry, time is money, and speed takes over, and you do end up then with a team that doesn't really have representation across whether it's gender, sex, identity, etc. So that accountability is really important.
I think that's where that's where also the question of when you do post recruitment ads, right? Where are you advertising to, right? Because it's not just within the pool that you receive, it's also who has access to these ads, who's being told to apply for a certain fellowship, for instance, or that kind of path. I think something that I have heard, right, is like, oh, there aren't enough of X, X category to choose from, right? And the thing is, like, there are systemic reasons why there aren't, right? But then sometimes that means that no, there might not be like there might not be a whole swath of very senior individuals in this area, right? Maybe there are just a handful, and so then what that means though is we need to create those, right? And it takes time, and I think we're seeing that, and we're seeing increased growth, glass ceilings being shattered all over the place, but it does take time, right? And so I guess I think the discussion turns to what to do during that time, how to build that culture up.
I want to add one idea here. I think sometimes we have the people from minority groups have a great technical skills, and we should also make sure we have support on some of the training on other skills, such as if we host leadership workshops, how to negotiate, or working in a team. These skills, and also work to provide some more support for people to work in the community, in additional to provide the training on the technical expertise. We try to educate everyone.
I think a big thing that I care about is values. As a community, we need to value this type of work more. And the best way to do that is money. So, we should be giving people more money to be participating in panels like this. We should be giving money to students and innovators who are starting new initiatives, actually carrying out all the EDI work that is on all these grants. We should be giving special fellowships for students who are not just merit-based, because that merit has systemic issues, right? Integrated there. There needs to be a metric for leadership outreach, right? I think that's, since that's what sort of I've been pushing on through the AC, but I think that's how we should lead with the ACs, right? We should say, this is our community and these are our values. And if you want to contribute, you need to contribute in these holistic ways.
I absolutely agree. I think that particularly for those whose identities are historically excluded from these spaces, it's also those, there's already barriers to being in the space. And then on top of that, there's additional labor that's almost expected, right? To be on the panels, to write the EDI section, and to be the poster person, right? Things like that. And I think that definitely it's important to recognize that. I think there's a lot more to talk about there, and we certainly have more to talk about, but with only 10 minutes left, I did want to turn it over to our guests, to our attendees. If anyone has either a question or a comment on something that particularly resonated with you, we'd welcome you to let's see, I think that you have if you can, in your reactions, if you can maybe raise your hand, and then we'll ask you to unmute and ask your question. Just a quick scan. Oh, Helen, it does look like you're muted.
Oh, I couldn't unmute.
There you go.
I think there's a question from the audience.
Okay. All right, there we go. Valeria.
Yes, hi. It was really interesting to listen to everyone talk about their experiences. I was wondering, do you feel as though if you are a representative, for example, in your organization of some sort of minority group, is there a larger onus on yourself versus a more majority part of the organization to be representative on committees and other I guess, works within your organization? And how do you feel that impacts your ability to perform your actual, I guess, job that you are engaged with?
Are you able to unmute, Helen?
Oh, I think this started from a lot of new young PIs, but we have like a little card that has like 10 little circles, and every time you say no to something and then you get to 10, then you get yourself a treat. But yeah, you just say no to a lot of things. Like I said no to a thing today because I felt like, oh, I was like, this is too much work for me. So I gave myself a little check. So yeah, I do think it's natural. I don't blame a lot of people to reach out, right? For us to be included, or for me to be included, but I also think it's equally fine for me to say no to everything. Yeah, that punch card is important.
I'm trying to help you. Oh no, I'm sorry, panelists. It seems.
Yeah, we couldn't unmute ourselves. Yeah, I wanted to chime in also here. In academia, this is super common because we are called on write grants, have diversity metrics and so on. And I've had this experience where I've been called on to serve on groups. And I mean, it's not explicitly stated, but you have this kind of like question mark behind your, right behind your head, asking why was I actually called? Is it because of my identity or is it because of my contributions? And I've had situations where it's definitely been because of my identity, because somebody needed to check a mark here or there. And my contributions were determined to be valuable after the fact, right? So it's kind of like you're not called in to play from the beginning because of your contributions, because of your scholarship, but just because of your identity. And this is definitely a challenge. It's a persisting challenge. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, and it's going to take essentially leaders and people like everyone that is represented in this panel and in the audience to really have this in mind for any change in the future to really take on. But it is definitely, Valeria, what you mentioned, a persistent issue in academia for sure.
Yeah, I've absolutely experienced this, working within tech organizations, oftentimes being the only female or being of Middle Eastern descent, oftentimes being tasked within interview processes to assess specifically culture fit and, topics around EDI. So it's frustrating. It's even more frustrating because then when you express your viewpoint, it can get oftentimes ignored. So, I think the best I've been able to do is to speak up about it and to really express my dissatisfaction. But Helen, I think I'm going to take your advice and make up that card and say a few more no's in that regard.
I can add one additional point. I experienced similar experiences, and I agree with everyone who already said how shall we do it? For me, it's sometimes I see these as opportunities for me to grow and for me to make my contributions. So in a way, sometimes when people come to me to ask for this request, I think about the role models and the mentors, the female role models I had when I was young. And I thought if I could be someone for the younger generation, I would love to spend a bit more time and just to take the extra opportunities for people to see this is how women currently in the community and in the field are working together, and this is a welcoming community.
Absolutely, great points across the board. I think that's exactly it, right? I think I love the punch card. I love the punch card idea, because the truth is, I think that if we had unlimited resources, these are these are issues that we are passionate about. I think, we recognize we didn't speak about it too in depth, but I think all of us did acknowledge the importance of mentorship and role models, and mentorship going both ways. And so that's definitely something that ultimately, like, even if there is interest, there is limited resources. And so being able to balance that and make the difficult decision but often quite necessary decision to say no, right? Because ultimately that does also, won't be, if you're completely burnt out and have no time left, then won't be able to do that anyhow. So I'm just scanning. I don't think there are any other questions across from the attendees. Any last thoughts from the panelists of what we talked about today?
Even though I say I like to say no to a lot of things, the things that I do say yes, I try to be very strategic about it. And I realized that I try to pick things that actually help me grow as a person and in my career as well. So I think when I was younger, I was organizing a lot for, seminar series within the department, stuff like that. And now as a faculty member, I realize those are actually very useful skills, because I'm co-chairing a conference, and it's very easy for me and very straightforward to figure out how to do the logistics of that. So I think it's important to say no, but also say yes strategically and reframe the thinking that it will help you grow, sort of what Shijing was also saying.
Yeah, I agree with what Helen and some of the other panelists said. I think so obviously it's not possible to do everything, but being strategic about what you choose to do is very important. But sometimes if I say no, I ask myself, is it because I'm afraid that I can't, is it based on fear, or is it based on genuinely, essentially prioritizing? So I think, as Helen, you said, I think there are opportunities that really helps you grow, and then also, maybe a really important, right, to be able to inspire and motivate others, or really create some of these pathways that we talked about, right? So I think it's really important to look at it. And I do think in terms of mentoring, and I really see this as, how can we get people beyond specific groups really engaged? How do we have these conversations to check some of our own biases, and really question when others are, right? I mean, how can we get engagement from everyone to really help? So the onus doesn't fall exclusively on one set of individuals, is something that I guess we need to continue to think about how to do that.
Absolutely. I think an excellent point to leave off on, meaning that the conversation must continue, and the action, the changes do take time, and there's certainly more to go. But I will say for myself, and I'm sure that the attendees as well, very much appreciated hearing from all of you. Hopefully this is the first of many conversations that we'll have together. And I wanted to thank you all for your time, your valuable time with us today. If we could just smile for a group for the Twitter account of 3. Go. Wonderful. All right. With that marks the end of our inaugural Break the Bias session for International Women's Day. Thank you very much to our panelists, to the attendees, and to the staff at the Acceleration Consortium. Have a wonderful day. Take care.